6-0 vote. The second amendment that I have introduced would simply eliminate the $10 billion bailout for Jeff Bezos to fly to the moon. Mr. Bezos wants to go to the moon. Good for him. He has $186 billion in personal wealth. He became $81 billion richer during the pandemic. He is the second wealthiest person.
Coupled with record inflation, would impact and inflict harmful cuts on vital programs that hardworking Americans struggling with rising costs of living rely on and their national security. DeLauro added that she looks forward to enacting bipartisan, full-year spending bills as soon as possible. Before this broader spending talks can begin, lawmakers must grapple with the imminent September 30th expiration of current funding. The likeliest and most major point of contention is provisions governing energy project permitting that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has promised to attach to the upcoming funding patch to keep the government open. But GOP senators like top Budget Committee Republican Lindsey Graham of Carolina have said they aren't about to accept those reforms to help Democrats along. However, neither party wants to shoulder the blame of the government shutdown. So far, bipartisan negotiations on fiscal 2023 spending bills haven't even begun. A spokesperson for a lawmaker said they can't start until Democrats agree to a framework for the talks that would preserve a number of long-running policy provisions attached to bills. If the government were to shut down, most Americans will feel the impacts in one way or another, but several key programs would continue operating. According to CBS News, many national parks will likely shut down, while mortgage and other loan applications could be delayed because the IRS could stop verifying income and Social Security numbers. Government services that are deemed essential would continue despite a shutdown. Social Security benefits would continue to go out in the event of a government shutdown too. That's because Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are among the mandatory spending that isn't subject to annual appropriations from Congress. Government shutdown would not initially affect food stamps, and the Department of Agriculture, which is responsible for the SNAP program, has already shared its shutdown contingency plan, stating that these programs would continue operations during a lapse in appropriations. Benefits may be affected because a stopgap funding bill will be needed to authorize the Department of Agriculture to send out benefits for 30 days after the start of a shutdown. In the 2018 shutdown, the USDA avoided that issue by paying food stamp benefits early in January of 2019. If it hadn't done so before the 30-day window expired, the agency wouldn't have been able to pay the benefits in March.
Mr. Toole, you've been very direct in some of the things that you've said. This doesn't make sense at all. So if we could start with Mr. Tootin, if you could tell me what you think we could do and help you do that job better to make sure the Western drought does not significantly get worse, but we can improve.
First, thank you to this.
Folks, we have a ton of news about the fourth stimulus check and Social Security benefits. Be sure to continue watching this video because you definitely don't want to miss out on it. Stimulus checks in 2020 and 2021 prevented the U.S. from entering a recession or maybe even a depression. Though due to the inflow of capital going to both people and businesses, inflation has risen and lawmakers are facing a dilemma. They have to determine if more direct relief will present somewhat of a chance to rising inflation, even more, or if it could help the U.S. curb inflation. Lawmakers are pushing for the latter as millions of more people continue to urge that Congress take more action. Stimulus checks and the $3 trillion in relief allegedly have contributed 3% in inflation by the end of 2021. The direct relief payment helped the bank accounts of millions of Americans, and if more relief is spent heavily on discretionary purchases that might make costs rise. According to the data from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, found that relief from the government prevented 11 million Americans from falling in poverty. The department reported that the most impactful programs for alleviating poverty was economic impact payments under the American Rescue Plan and unemployment compensation. Now, a tax policy center and a senior researcher found that a new round of checks would definitely help Americans dealing with inflation. She stated delivering some sort of cash benefit now would sort of protect them from the inflation that's happening around them. And a former presidential campaign candidate, Andrew Yang, said that stimulus checks are not to blame for inflation and that he's definitely pro-direct relief. Supporters of a fourth stimulus check have agreed that a quick, broad outpouring of cash would really ease the economic hardships caused by the crisis. And now, according to Fox, President Biden may resort to using emergency powers if oil companies don't increase output at their refineries. The letters come one day after Biden ordered the sale of another 45 million barrels of crude oil from the U.S. Strategic Oil Reserve. Biden's letters does not offer a timeline for when his administration will resort to emergency powers, threatening to only do so in the near term, and the oil companies have yet to publish a response to Biden's letter. The administration is touting airline standards it is proposing to adopt as a climate win, even though its technical documents say that the rule is not expected to cut planet-warming emissions. The Federal Aviation Administration announced on Wednesday that it will propose to implement airline climate standards put forward by the EPA under the former president's administration. President Biden has a big update, and so does Nancy Pelosi on the spending bill. Pelosi says they are now ready to pass the Build Back Better package. And here's some good news. Nancy Pelosi said today that negotiations on a massive spending bill and climate package remain active, despite the opposition from Senate centrists that stopped the legislation in its tracks last year. Pelosi emphasized that House Democrats who passed a roughly $2 trillion package in November are essentially sidelined as Senate leaders seek to continue delicate talks with centrist holdouts. But a day after meeting with President Biden and Chuck Schumer at the White House to discuss the economy, Pelosi said they are still working to enact a slimmed-down version of the House legislation this year. Pelosi said during a press briefing at the White House, reconciliation is a Senate matter. We passed our bill, and we made our views known, and that is a closely held negotiation on the Senate sides.
Help solve those problems. And indeed, this package, the Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act, is just that. It's a compilation of bills put together by lawmakers who are responding to their constituents. And I've heard from the other side of the aisle that, in fact, it would have been nice if we came together in a bipartisan way. So I would note that colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle from Iowa, Arkansas, New York, Nebraska, Ohio, Illinois, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa, Tennessee. Feels like I'm practicing state capitals with my fifth grader. Nebraska, Illinois, Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska, South Dakota, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, Minnesota, Illinois, Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Indiana, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, Florida, Wyoming, Virginia, Minnesota. Each of these are individual members of Congress from the Republican side of the aisle who are leading on this issue. In fact, 2 of the bills in this package are led by our Republican colleagues, and I am proud that I have joined with Congressman Dusty Johnson in support of the bipartisan Butcher Block Act. I am proud to be his co-lead as he leads that important piece of legislation. It's a common sense step towards allowing American processors the ability to expand their operations, launch a new business, or just make sure they are keeping...
The gentlewoman's time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield the distinguished woman an additional minute.
Thank you, Mr.
You're
Chairman.
recognized.
This is the first step towards lowering meat prices, but in addition to increasing processing capacity for American cattlemen and poultry producers, we need to go after anti-competitive practices in the meat industry. And that's why I'm proud that this package also includes the bipartisan Meat and Poultry Special Investigator Act. The bill would establish a special investigator at USDA to investigate violations of our existing antitrust laws that have been on the books for more than 100 years. And I thank Congresswoman Miller Meeks for co-leading this effort. This bill has broad bipartisan support and bicameral support. So I thank Senators John Tester.
Why? The answer is simple. The lack of active forest management, decades of fire